Hey, this is Boney James, and you're listening to Jazziz, not what you think.
Hi, Boney.
Hey, thanks
Great
for
to have
having me.
you on the show. Great to see you. It's been a long time.
Yes, great to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, again, I've been following your career for quite a while. In fact, I may have been one of your earliest fans.
Oh,
I was sent a CD of your first album, at least it was the first album that I knew of, from a little label in Texas called Spindletop, which your label mate at the time was David Benoit. And I said, "Who is this guy? It's kind of a
okay.
funky sound. I haven't really heard anything quite like this since my our mutual friend David Sanborn was became so well known for that kind of R&B sax. Even though obviously both of you can play jazz, but that you stuck in that groove and it worked for you. Obviously worked for David. Um, Tell me what brought you more into the R&B side of things. I know that you play with a lot of spectacular artists in the R&B world that really puts you in a direction that sets you apart from some of the other contemporary or what some people call smooth jazz players.
Well, I guess it goes all the way back to the beginning when I first discovered music. I always gravitated towards the sort of groovy R&B sound. Just listening to the radio as a kid in the '70s, there was an awful lot of good music coming out on the R&B side then, and bands like Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, all the Motown stuff. That's just the music that really piqued my interest. And right around that same time, I picked up the saxophone, and it wasn't until I heard Grover in the mid '70s that was sort of combining the R&B and the saxophone, my two loves together, that I thought got this sort of light bulb over my head that this was this kind of music that really turned me on, and it just always was that way. When I started working as a musician, I did work almost exclusively with R&B bands. My first gig was with Morris Day right after the time broke up, and I was playing keyboards and a little bit of sax in that band. And I apparently just had an affinity for producing that kind of sound. When I started writing my own music, I really was just determined to try and be truthful to my inner self. And I had been really tired of working as a sideman, backing up other people and recreating other people's music. So I was just going to go into the shed and try and see what came out. And what came out ended up sounding like what is now known as Boney James music.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So what's great about that is that I remember that first album was really kind of an interesting debut album because it was you solidified your place early on with that sound.
Hmm.
And even when back then few people knew who you were, but then when you signed to Warner, those albums became smash hits, and all of a sudden everyone knew who Boney James was. In the smooth jazz world, you were the guy.
Wow.
And so I've always enjoyed watching that. And the thing that I when I went back and looked at your early beginnings, I mean, you played jazz early on. I mean, you were a clarinet player. I mean, that this isn't something that sometimes we see contemporary smooth jazz players that don't really come from jazz. They just come from sort of instrumental pop. But
Hmm.
you had those early roots, and yet, do you think that having those early roots helped you formulate your own style with the technique and things that you learn when you're doing more traditional forms of jazz?
Well, I don't consider myself a great jazz player by any means. I have not concentrated on that language and have mainly tried to formulate my own sound, whatever that was, and just respond to the music that was coming naturally from within me. And I've sort of really tried to shy away from using a lot of jazz cliches and licks and things in my soloing from a very early time. I was really trying to be much more melodic. That was sort of my concept. And but when you're a young kid and you're learning how to play the saxophone, you got to learn that stuff.
Right.
You learn how to play the horn, and I did study that stuff. I had a couple of great teachers. You know, Most notably Bill Green here in Los Angeles. He was a great Kansas City-born session musician, multi-instrumentalist in Los Angeles, and I had the great fortune to study the horn with him. But like I said, the music that really excited me was much more of a combo of the jazz and the R&B. I love improvising and creating on the spot, and that's very much jazz. But in terms of the language of traditional jazz, that's something I've almost intentionally shied away from in my own music.
I appreciate your honesty on that. It's interesting, but it's clear that with or without the jazz roots, you love Grover Washington. Did you ever get to meet Grover?
I met him once right before he passed away here in Los Angeles. He was playing a little club, not a medium-sized club, and
Hmm.
my then agent took me to see him play, and we got to hang out. He introduced me from the stage, which for me as a young artist was really overwhelming, and he seemed aware of the music that I had started making. So it was a real thrill, and he was just as wonderful as one would have hoped he would have
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a little inside baseball.
been.
I had a little label in the Verve Group uh,
Mm.
that I started with Lee Ritenour and Mark Wexler, who I know you know very well. And Mark, Lee, and I had this label called IE Music. And we signed, Lee did his Twist albums, and then we signed Eric Marienthal. We had some world music. And then we signed Al Jarreau. And then we signed, or I should say, I thought we signed Grover. Grover agreed to sign with us. We met him at the Grammys, and the pretty much the deal was done and dusted. And then I believe I can't remember whether it was Mark or Lee. I think it was Mark. We get a call from Grover and said, "Guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but I can't do it." We're like, "Well, what do you mean? I thought we were going to do this." And he said, "No. When Sony, when he was on Columbia, when they found out that I was leaving, they offered me 10 records firm."
Wow.
Now, Boney knows what that means, but I can tell people not in the music business, it means that they're going to give you money to go make 10 albums, and you go make them over the next X number of years. So that's a nice advance.
Yeah.
And so we were all gentlemen about it. We said, Grover, you do what you got to do. I mean, you can't pass up an opportunity like that. And then he passed away. And it was so sad because for so many reasons. But he was just a wonderful guy. And he was a guy who he was my kind of intro to smooth jazz. It was Wine Light, like so many other people that checked that album out and said,
Yeah.
I got to get me more of this.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that was such an inspiration. But you've worked with some artists that were, may I say, more adventurous, and yet they did funky stuff like George Duke. George was someone who I couldn't believe the versatility from that man. I mean, he could play anything. And tell me, do you remember some of the dates with George?
Well, I mean, I first remembered hearing George because I was a Frank Zappa fan a little bit when I was a kid too,
Of
and
course.
he was in one of the great Zappa bands, and my friends and I, all young musicians, were really like, wow, check this guy out. And of course, then he went on to incredible solo career and producing career, and all the great records that he's made.
Hmm.
That was just one of the cats that I was so amazed that I even came to know him. That's one of the
Sure.
great things of having a career in music is that you get to hang out sometimes with some of the people you grew up idolizing. And George is just anyone that knew him, he had an infectious spirit. He was just one of those people. If he came in the room, it lit up.
Absolutely.
And so I think the first time I went over to his studio in his house. It's a beautiful studio he had in his house in up in Outpost, not too far from where I live in Los Angeles, and it was a compilation record he was making. He was doing something with Eric Benet, and I played a solo on Superwoman, the Stevie
Mm,
Wonder thing. I can't
yeah.
remember what the project was, but then I just kept seeing him around, festivals and stuff, and finally I had a song that popped up that I was working on, and I thought, maybe George would appear on it. So he said yes, and I went over to his place and we hung out, and he played the Rhodes on this incredible song. It's called Total Experience, and I wanted him to play a solo, but it was only an 8 measure solo. I said, George, you need to climax more in the solo. He said, I can't climax in 8 measures, but
That's
he
great.
did, and it turned out great. I'm still really proud of that piece of music that we made, and of course, when he passed, Al Jarreau did a tribute to him
Sure.
called "My Old Friend," and I actually had the honor of producing 2 tracks on that record for Al, and one of them was a remake of this song that George and Al had done once before, George had done, and Al wanted to sing on it. And anyway, I got all the raw multi tracks from George's studio,
Hmm.
and put Al on it and added some drums and sort of reconfigured the track. And it was just great to have George's stuff here in my studio.
Oh
You
yeah,
could feel his spirit coming through the computer. It's amazing.
yeah, that's great. So who are some of the other legends that you played with that were great experiences for you?
Well, of course, Al Jarreau, George Benson. I got to fly to Phoenix where he was living at the time. I don't know if he still has a place there. He probably does. And put him on a song called Hypnotic of Mine. And that was
Hmm.
just amazing. Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind, and Fire got to work with. And oh my God, I'd have to look at the list. The list of artists I've collaborated with, I was recently
Oh, I
putting
know.
it together for the label. It's the 30 some odd people. So,
Yeah, and then your association with Paul Brown has been, a good part of your career. Tell me how that happened and why that became such a I wouldn't maybe a turning point, but certainly a collaboration that was formidable in your career.
yeah, well, I mean, it was instrumental at first. When I first met Paul, we were on the road with Bobby Caldwell. I was the sax player in Bobby Caldwell's band, and Paul Brown was mixing front of house. Paul was mainly a studio engineer.
Hmm.
He had started as an assistant and worked his way up to engineer, had done some really great work with Luther Vandross, and had apparently done some work with Bobby. So Bobby, asked him to come on the road to do this tour of Japan, and that's how we met. Simultaneously, Paul had produced a few records for Spindletop,
Hmm.
and really had a burning desire to become a record producer. And I had a burning desire to become a solo artist right around that time. So he was going to make a Sam Riney record,
Right, I remember Sam.
Spindletop, and Sam Riney said, "I can't work for these Spindletop guys anymore." The business was not so great, and but Paul had the budget ready to go, and so he called me up after we got home from Japan. He said, "Had you ever thought about making a record?" And I'm like, "Man, I've been trying to make a record for 3 years now, writing songs, making demos, and I'd almost had a shot at Warner Brothers, and then it all fell apart." And I said, "Yeah, I got stuff." So we got together. 3 weeks later, we were in the studio making the Trust CD. It was
Yep.
a whirlwind. It was unbelievable. And then we went on to make another 6 or 7 records. I've actually made more records by myself than I had made with Paul. But of course, that was when we started. It was the burgeoning period of the music business,
Sure.
and we
Sure.
had a lot of big successes together. And I'm very grateful for all the music that we made.
And my naivete, I didn't realize early on when I sort of was introduced to his work that he was a guitar player.
Well,
I
I
thought
didn't
of
know
him as
that either.
oh, okay, okay, so I'm not alone here.
No, no, no. He'd never
And then
played.
I saw him with a guitar on an album, and I was like, is he just holding that guitar? Does he actually play?
No,
And then I
that was.
saw that he does play, and he's very influenced by George Benson.
Yeah, that was all completely new to, I think, almost everybody. I knew he had been a drummer in his past life, and he mainly focused on programming beats. I mean, that was one of his great contributions to
Hmm.
some of the records that we made together. And aside from his studio wizardry, I mean, he really was a great engineer and would make everything sound amazing. But it was complete surprise that he was a guitar player and was going to
Okay,
become a
all right.
solo guitar artist.
Okay, I don't feel like an idiot
Hmm.
as much anymore. Another collaborator I know you've worked with for quite a while, who a friend of mine as well, Rick Braun.
Yeah.
Uh, if I remember the thing that you guys did together that became pretty famous was the Hugh Masekela song. And tell me how that happened and how that kind of changed and it pivoted again.
Well, Rick Braun collaboration was something that also went back and preceded my time as a solo artist. I think I was playing as a sideman with a keyboard player named Dan Siegel. I'm sure you remember.
Oh, I love Dan.
Yeah, yeah, great guy, and he was working on a record and asked Rick and myself to come in and play on his record, and he put us in the booth together, playing unison. And the first time we played together, we turned to each other and said, "Man, we sound good together." It's just like that. We sound good together. And then he went on to start making his own records and called me to guest on a couple of things. And then I went on to make my own records and called him to guest on a couple of things. And then my manager at the time, a guy named Howard Lowell, who's passed away now, unfortunately,
Yeah, I knew
he
Howard.
he said, "You and Rick sound good together." Maybe we should talk about doing a collaboration CD, because we were both on Warner Brothers at the time, and Warner Brothers was famous for some of those great collaboration CDs, which was a thing, back then in the 80s and 90s. Of course, there was Double Vision with Bob James, David Sanborn, and Earl Klugh and George Benson had done this, and in our generation of artists, no one had done it. And so this was Howard's big idea, and Rick and I, of course, were really enthusiastic about it. And then we sat down and just started, trying to write some songs, and see what the album would consist of, and I think I brought up Grayson, but I could be wrong. But we were just trying to think of covers of frontline trumpet sax songs. "Song for My Father" was another one that we did,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and then Grayson came up, and we went into the studio and just played. It was an incredible band that day. It was Rick Braun, myself, Paulina DaCosta was playing percussion,
Love it.
Little John Roberts on drums, great keyboard player from Atlanta, Phil Davis, Ron Lawrence, who's recently just passed away, was playing guitar, Larry Kimpel on bass, and it was just a live party take, and it captured something special. That record still sounds pretty good to me.
A lot of energy, a lot of
Yeah,
energy there.
yeah.
Well, that's great. So back talking about Bobby Caldwell. I've known Bobby for a while. I know you've been friends for a while with Bobby. You played with him years ago. Is So he was the cat in the hat, but in the contemporary jazz world, you're the cat in the hat, right? And the thing that I've always found interesting is most people that wear hats is because they don't have hair. You have a lot of hair,
You have a lot of hair, yeah.
right? So normally it's to cover what's not happening up there, but not for Boney. He's got lots of hair. But the
Yeah,
hat has really become your signature.
it was a very simple, just a true life experience. Of my hair back in the '90s was much longer, down to here,
Hmm.
and I was playing a lot of those outdoor festivals, and the wind would blow my crazy hair around and would go in my mouth when I was trying to blow the horn. I was trying to put a hat on for these things, and as soon as I put the hat on, people kept coming up to me and saying, "Man, you look really cool in that hat." So I just responded to the positive reinforcement, and next thing you know, I had like a signature look, just organically.
It's the Boney James look for sure, and it's really funny. Um, my assumption is because you're so identifiable with the hat, sometimes when you take the hat off, it makes you a little less recognizable, right? Put the hat back on, I'm Boney, I'm someone else.
Well,
Um,
interestingly, I host these smooth jazz cruises with Marcus Miller, which has become a big part
yeah,
of
sure.
my, yeah. And when I'm walking around the ship, I never wear my hat when I'm just not working. And people have learned to recognize me. When I first started doing it, I'd be in elevators, people would be talking about my show, and I'm standing right there, and it was
Yeah.
kind of funny.
Yeah, but I love those experiences. I've had that experience happen to me before, where that's where we met years ago at a festival, and we'd have a booth where we give away magazines and swag, and someone came up to me and they said, I know Michael Fagan. I was like, you do? So you got to try. I'm sure you've done it before. You have to. I know. I'm going to go see Boney James. Yeah, you should. You
Yeah.
should go see him. He's here.
He
So
knows.
tell so switching gears, tell me about the new album Detour. This is how many records for Concord now?
Oh golly, I'd have to
Do we
count.
lose track?
Yeah, I know it's my 18th record overall, and I started with Concord in '03, or it might be '06. The first record came out, but I think I moved in '03. So Shine, I have to count. It'd be difficult. And I
Yeah.
did. I went to Verve for a minute.
I
Um,
remember.
yeah,
Trust. Wasn't Trust on for well, no,
no,
wait.
no, Contact was on Verve in
Yes,
2000, and
yes.
I think that was 7 or 8. Anyway, so there was a brief foray away, and then I came. They said, "Come home to Concord," and I've been there ever since. But it's a number of records. Yeah, it might
Yeah.
be might be
And
89.
and you work I'm assuming you work with my old partner Mark Wexler.
He's not there anymore,
No, 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 I know that.
but I
But
did.
but
Yeah,
during those years,
yeah, it was
uh,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
we love working with
Mark's a
him.
good record guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
what was interesting is so we had our IE music label, and Tommy LaPuma, who I know you know, uh, may his rest his soul because he's such a wonderful human being.
yeah,
I just love
totally.
Tommy. When he was at GRP, and then Universal acquired Polygram.
Mm.
So as part of that deal, they told us it's time to leave, and so we were basically wanting to continue our little label, but we weren't sure where we want to do it. So I introduced Mark to Glenn Barrows at Concord, and because I'd known Glenn for years since he acquired Concord
Wow.
from the original owner, which I don't know if you know the story. He was a car salesman,
Mm.
Carl Jefferson,
Mm.
and he was a wonderful guy. And so I met Glenn way back then. I introduced him to Mark, and lo and behold, Mark brought him onto Concord. The rest is history. He worked with artists like you and did a wonderful job at Concord.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's been a wonderful time. It's a very friendly label, and things are still going really well. So I'm grateful to have the association.
So tell me about the Detour. It's kind of has a lot of different genres, if you would.
Yeah.
You kind of purposely did a lot of different things on this record, it seems like.
You know, as per usual, I really just try to start writing songs at a certain point, and it comes out, and then part of my job is to sit back and listen to it myself and think, what is this? You know, how can I
Mhm.
how can I express what I'm feeling from this music in a way that's maybe poetic or catchy or something? And and I was listening to the music as I was creating it, and I thought, well, some of the stuff sounds kind of different. And at the same time, I was thinking about just the world that we've been living in, and boy, things really felt a little different. And
A little bit.
it's been so odd for the last couple of years. And I thought that the word detour just popped into my head, and I thought that really, to me, sums up both of those tendrils of thoughts. You know, how the planet's been on this detour, and my music is taking a little detour. And you know, the thing about a detour is you eventually get where you're going, and sometimes it can be something that you weren't expecting, and not always a bad thing. Um, and I just thought that was a very interesting theme for the record, and I think it's nicely reflective of the sound of some of the music.
Well, that's great. Well, look forward to more albums from Boney James. It was great to talk again. It's been way too long. Congrats with everything.
Thanks so much.
Hope after the Detour you're back on another track. To wherever you're heading, we'll follow you as well.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very
You
excited.
bet.
I mean, people are loving the new record. The Layla Hathaway is on their first time working with her,
Yeah,
and
love
Dante
Layla.
Winslow was out. That was a detour to work with one of the cats from the West Coast Get Down. That was another detour. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Well, great. Well, again, thanks and great to have you on the show. We'll talk again.
Thank you, man.
All right, take care.